Hi everyone, welcome to another Fireside chat without a fire because we're all obviously working remotely with Nick and Will, the founders of Rebase, who are a new partner for Insurtech UK. Delighted to be joined by them today just to hear a bit more about why they've joined the association and a bit about their work and their expertise in the property market. After all, that's a pretty zeitgeist conversation. So without further ado, I'd love to ask Nick and Will a little bit about what appealed to them about the mission we've been building at Insurtech UK. And why they joined and how we can kind of work together.
Thanks, James. Thank you very much for having us. Much appreciated. We joined Insurtech UK mainly because our business model draws us towards the fintech and Insurtech sector. We've recently advised a fellow member, Fintech OS, and we're helping them sort of fulfill their global office requirements. Ultimately, our aim is to be the go-to office advisors for London-based Insurtech companies. So that's predominantly the reason for joining up and becoming a member.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. Everyone needs an office, right? So, forgive my ignorance on this. Nick,
yes.
What does that entail? Office support in the devil in the details sort of side of things. Tell us about Rebase. What do you guys do day to day? Where does your expertise kind of lie, and how can founders benefit from that?
Yeah, absolutely. So taking a step back, so Will and I had sort of corporate jobs for the last sort of 15 years, working in Hong Kong, Shanghai, and then we finished up in London. And during COVID, we spotted an opportunity really where suddenly office space, which historically was quite a boring subject matter, suddenly everyone started talking about it and the balance between working from home and working in office space. So we quit our jobs in the eye of the storm in December last year, and after a spell in the garden, set up Rebase. So Rebase was born, we focus on small and medium-sized businesses. So typically sizes range between 5 people and 450, which I appreciate is quite a wide bracket. And we're a tenant-only business. So we're completely aligned with occupiers, looking really to transition from their current spaces or look at new ways of working. So whether that's flexible office accommodation or traditional leases, we take care of that whole journey.
What do you find are the typical pain points along that journey? I mean, obviously I've rented offices myself, been a tenant many a time.
Yeah.
What are the sort of features of that journey that you really add value in and find the most pain points that you can solve?
Yeah, I think it really depends on the company's age and size. So for startups in this context, I think the biggest pain point is barrier for entry. So the cost of obviously putting down deposits, capital going out into fit out, and then the sheer cost of office space in central London. And really since Brexit, we saw this rise of an already established market, which grew exponentially, which is the flexible office market with likes of WeWork and Fora and the Office Group, etc. So that is a solution for sort of small companies. But then as time has gone on, I think the workplace conundrum coming out of COVID has been something at the forefront of everyone's mind. So everyone's very emotional about working from home, and getting that balance right between home and office space.
And Nick, look, I think as with everything on this, we're all insurance geeks this end across the supply chain. So, I don't want to breeze over, the USPs effectively, all the things that differentiate what Rebase do. So let's go back on that a little bit. Tell me a bit more about why Rebase's service is differentiated, because having been through, even just recently, a personal experience, we're coming to the end of a license in the current office we're in, and we've been looking locally. We're regional, so not perhaps London focused. But you do get somewhat assaulted by property brokers and other people when you go online and never really know who you're dealing with. Tell me how you solve and get involved in those pain points, and what really stands out from the way you operate. Because one thing that just slowly dripped into my brain was you saying that you're the tenant side, sort of focused on the people who are doing the renting, rather than just trying to get someone in situ, and that resonated with me a bit down the line.
Well, that's lucky. So yeah, so the first USP is tenant only. So we don't have any landlord clients. So naturally, that you know, there's no kind of conflict of interest in that regard. I think one of the big ones for us is the fact that there are lots of independent companies set up to advise occupiers in specific areas of a transaction. Yeah, so whether that's flexible office only or whether that's leasehold only. And then in the bigger companies, there are lots of different departments. There might be 3 or 4 different departments just giving one client advice on a fairly simple project. The way that we've set up the company is that all of the advisors that work with us have to be very knowledgeable and experienced in all of those facets. So say, for example, Worry and Peace wanted to consider a flexible arrangement within an office space. If you went to a flexible broker, for example, they would only be able to cover off one piece of the market. We would open up subleases, assignments, fitted spaces, landlord spaces, and flexible spaces. So you get the full variety of what we can offer. And we can also embrace technology as well. So we're not sort of wrapped in a kind of corporate structure where we have to use those corporate technologies. We use best-in-class technologies which are available independently, and we also use best-in-class independent companies who can help deliver the full service.
Thanks. That was really useful. I'm glad I asked as well, because I've definitely found it really stressful as a business owner. It can gobble up your time, kind of going to look at properties and not knowing who's your rep effectively. You're being consulted by someone. So that sounds really genuinely valuable, and that's not just me being sycophantic, because you're wonderfully supporting.
I would add one point to that, which is we set up to be advisors rather than brokers. So we're not there to sell you office space. We're there to advise on the overall strategy and open up all the different concepts available to you. And we're not driven by volume either. We're driven by finding a solution that suits the business.
That's fantastic.
That's important. I completely forgot our ethos, which is very much we're not driven by volume of transactions. We used to have to deliver large transactions in big businesses, whereas now we're driven by opening up a variety of different concepts to companies and delivering a project, whether it's small, medium, or large in size.
It's useful, guys. Really useful, and more power to you on that model, because Lord knows that especially when you start raising money, everyone wants to be your friend and sell you something. So having people advising you is always the best place to be, isn't it? So that's useful. Well, look, let's get on the rabbit hole, shall we, of COVID? And I'll start with my case study. I raised finance and equity over the course of the pandemic. And was hiring people remotely. I had no fixed office because of all the lockdown and workflow. And now I find myself in a strange situation where I'm always starting to worry that I've got a more expensive office need than I would have pre-pandemic, because you've got people distributed everywhere and they're all starting to say, oh, we'd like to get together more often. How has COVID affected the property market for you? And how do you think companies, startups, scale-ups should handle that? Because my concern as a founder, and I've already put it out there, is that actually, far from this being a moment where we can all save a lot in terms of fixed office costs, there might end up being a dispersed office costs. And is that going to affect pricing? Are we especially for regional work, are we going to see London being less eminent in the startup office space in particular? Tell me about some of those themes and where we want to go with that in terms of the conversation.
So the headline numbers through COVID have sort of changed very little, surprisingly little actually. I would say rents kind of dropped in central London between sort of 5 and 10%, and have quickly sort of picked back up based on quality of buildings. But really the big changes financially is what's written behind the deal. So the incentives, rent-free, fit outs, various other things within leases and licenses. So that economically, that's the first change. But I think the big one is the fact that real estate, I think pre-COVID, was very much centered around business, revenue, money, and really just a place to report for duty. And I think since COVID, there's been a big shift towards people. And I think people have got much more power in real estate decisions. So contractually within recruitment agreements, for example, people are asking for 2 or 3 days in the office. They're asking for flexibility to be contractually obligated. And the actual physical space itself, you know, we used to work in banks of desks, and it did really feel like you were sort of turning up at 9 and leaving at 5. Whereas I think we're going to see a lot more clubhouse feel. So people report into work and they have a good time. They meet in an informal context. There's enjoyable things to do at work. There's collaboration spaces. And there's really that enticement into town and making it worth people's while. And then the final thing, which I don't think is being delivered well at the moment, and I think it's a trend to watch out for, is space as a service. So there are signs of it where you may wish to go into London, but you don't want to commit to a long-term obligation. But you and your company may want to meet up for 1 or 2 or 3 days in the week and only pay for that space for that period of time. And hopefully, we hope that we'll see more of that.
That's fantastic. I mean, they're macro trends as well, aren't they? Which is really useful, and they all resonate with me. And certainly, you know, you have your co-working space in London. I won't mention the one that everyone knows, but you know, the pricing, as you mentioned, doesn't feel relevant to the usage that we want to use it for. So there's definitely going to be a transition there. What are the other trends that you're seeing with Insurtechs and fintechs? Obviously, Nick, you alluded to that kind of hybrid experience-led, you know, social experience for a few days a week, the clubhouse model. Anything else on the horizon that's piquing interest?
Yeah, flexibility is key. I think a lot of companies, you know, a couple that we're advising at the moment, are looking to create a hub in London, and pushing abroad as well, and trying to make that process seamless. So in this particular example, into the States. And trying to wrap these contractual obligations with one particular provider, to make it more seamless, and also into Europe as well. So I would say international expansion is a theme.
And is there any examples or feasibility even in startups almost, you know, crowding together into clusters and then taking a co-license together? Where that wouldn't necessarily leave one or the other obligated for the remainder of the balance for a larger space, almost like, you know, creating their own co-working, but with other peers that aren't competitors. Is anyone doing that? Would it even be possible? Because as I understand, it would be relatively complex for the standard landlord-tenant model, but it feels to me like something that would personally appeal to me, because getting in a room with Ed from Flock or James from Urban Jungle, you know, that'd be great mind share in the coffee cooler, wouldn't it, and everything else. So.
Yeah, exactly. So you're right. I think one of the things that's prohibiting it at the moment is a standard lease prohibits people from sharing spaces and creating a landlord and tenant relationship. So I think what we'll see is more of that space as a service. So you could book, you know, with the people that you want to go and share spaces with, for days, and do it in that way is kind of the only way of doing that at the moment.
Yeah, for me as well, I worry slightly that would lead to another middle person that's taking extra margin. So is that a regulatory piece, or is that mainly just the way things have always been done that dictates the way the leases are operated?
It's the way it's a regulatory. It's kind of it's the contract law between within the lease, which is a bit of a shame.
Okay. I was more wondering if that could ever change, or is that
I hope it does change,
and
I hope it does change. I hope people can share spaces, particularly as people come into offices for 2 or 3 days of the week. It feels wasted to have it empty for the balance of the week.
I think
it does.
It's workable on a very small scale. You know, if you're 4 or 5 small startups of 3, 4, 5 people each, you can make it work. You can get around it. But as you scale bigger than that, it just becomes too much of a headache.
That's the end of our fireside chat with Rebase. Will, Nick, thank you for your support of Insurtech UK. Really enjoyed the conversation and hope that the founders and members take up the opportunity to engage with you and probe you in different ways about the ups and downs of post-COVID property and tenancy. Thanks very much from me, and thanks to all our other partners and members.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, James.
Thanks, James.
Cheers, guys.
Have a good
Take care. Bye.
weekend.
Bye now.
Bye.